So far we've been talking about drawing Lewis structures of molecules, more than one atom, for example CH4, by picturing the atoms with their valence electrons and then bringing the atoms together to share the valence electrons. So for example, carbon is in group 4A, has 4 valence electrons. We would draw the dot symbol for carbon with the 4 dots on each of the 4 positions around the center. The 4 hydrogen atoms, hydrogen has 1 valence electron. I can envision as being on each of the positions with his lone electron pointing toward carbon, and then as these come together, these electrons are shared. And so I would draw a picture of the Lewis structure of CH4 like this. The carbon with his 4 dots would share each one of those dots with one of the hydrogens, which also brings in a dot. And there I have 4 single bonds. This is called a single bond. Remember that a single bond has 2 electrons or 1 pair of electrons. There are 4 single bonds around the carbon. I don't see any lone pairs, and the octet rule is satisfied for carbon. Carbon has 2, 4, 6, 8. Each hydrogen, recall, does not want 8. Hydrogen wants 2, so each hydrogen has 2. Where the red dots are not actually part of this Lewis structure, they're just me counting around. So the green is the Lewis structure for CH4, and this is what I would see. It could get a little bit more complicated. For example, if I had the molecule C2H6, now I have 8 atoms to try to arrange in a fashion to make the Lewis structure. It helps if I know a little bit about these types of molecules, and C2H6 has a common name. It's called ethane, and often we see it written not as C2H6 but as CH3CH3. Take a minute and look to convince yourself that these 2 formula represent exactly the same number of carbons and hydrogens. Alright, we do see that they represent 2 carbons, 6 hydrogens. The second way of writing it gives us some more information about the structure. What we see is that the carbon has 3 hydrogens surrounding it, and it is indeed attached to this second carbon, which also has 3 hydrogens surrounding it. I'm going to go ahead and connect the carbons and the hydrogens and connect the carbons with each other, and this is exactly what you would get if you started with a carbon with 4 dots. Alright, it's a little sloppy, but you can see essentially what's happening is each of these bonds are forming by sharing 1 dot, 1 electron from the carbon and 1 electron from the hydrogen, and each of the carbons has 2, 4, 6, 8, 2, 4, 6, 8. Each of the hydrogens has 2 electrons, which is what it wants instead of the octet, and we see a single bond between the 2 carbons. If I have something like C2H4, another way to write that is CH2CH2, and I have 2 carbons connected to each other, and each carbon has 2 hydrogens. Now in this case, let me get a little space. I have a carbon connected to a carbon, and each of the carbons has only 2 hydrogens connected to it. What I'm drawing here is often referred to as the skeleton. It's just sort of the basic arrangements and attachments of the atoms. But let's think about it in terms of their dots. So carbon would have 1, 2, 3, 4 dots around it. The second carbon would also have 1, 2, 3, 4 dots around it. And each hydrogen would have 1 dot. You see that we've accounted for all of the bonds, and yet we have these 2 extra electrons, 1 on each carbon, left over. We're not going to have an odd number of electrons, and if we counted, this left carbon has 2, 4, 6, 7. There are only 7 electrons on this left carbon. He doesn't have an octet yet. But we can achieve the octet on the left carbon by sharing 1 from his neighboring carbon, because the right-hand carbon is in exactly the same situation. He has 2, 4, 6, 7 electrons. So envision putting these 2 electrons in a double bond And at this point, we have exactly the number of valence electrons that we came into the picture with. Each carbon started with 4, each hydrogen started with 1, and now my carbon has 8. 2, 4, 6, 8. My right-hand carbon has 8. 2, 4, 6, 8. My octet rules are satisfied. So C2H4 has a double bond between the carbons. C2H6, that was this guy, only has a single bond between the carbons because there are other hydrogens to join in. I could take this one step further. Let me do it kind of quickly. Let's look at C2H2. We can also write C2H2 as CHCH. We often see it written that way. And what's happening there is this. You take a minute, pause the video if you need to, count up how many dots the carbon would have started with, how many the hydrogens would have started with, and see that you don't come to the conclusion that you need a triple bond between the carbons in order to satisfy the octets. If we look at these 3 molecules in a row, after you've make sure you've paused the video and looked at that carefully, we see a single bond between the carbons, a double bond between the carbons, and a triple bond between the carbons. If we take these 3 molecules or similar molecules into the laboratory and study them, we see differing properties. Although these 3 molecules are very, very similar, they each contain 2 carbons and then some number of hydrogens, we see very different properties in terms of these bonds. We can actually measure what's known as bond length. The bond length is a distance between the 2 atoms that make up the bond. And if we take these molecules into the lab and measure the bond length between the 2 carbons, each of these molecules shows a markedly different bond length, whereas the bond length between the carbons and the hydrogens in each of these molecules is very, very similar. The bond length between the 2 carbons in each of these molecules is very, very different. So there's something going on, something that has to do with the difference between a single, a double, and a triple that gives us different bond lengths. And indeed what we find is that our longest bond is the single bond, and our shortest bond is the triple bond. The double bond sits somewhere in between the length of the single and the triple. Now why is this? I'm actually putting more and more electrons to be shared between the 2 atoms, so you might think that that would make it get longer, but it doesn't. It actually makes the bond get shorter. The shortest bond is the triple bond because by putting more and more negative electrons in between the 2 nuclei, which contain protons that are positive, that actually shrinks it in and pulls them in closer. So more electrons actually shortens the distance between the 2 positively charged nuclei, the protons in the nucleus. If I'm only sharing 2 electrons, rather than 6 in the triple bond, if I'm only sharing 2 electrons, then the distance between the protons in the nuclei of the 2 atoms is actually longer. So single bonds are the longest, triple bonds are the shortest. Likewise, there is the property of bond strength or bond energy. A bond strength is a measure of the amount of energy it takes to separate the bond, to actually break it. If I want to come in and break these bonds, pull them apart, reach in, pull them apart, we see that markedly different strengths of the single, the double, and the triple. The strongest bond is the triple. The weakest bond is the single. That probably makes sense to you. It takes more energy to separate these 2 nuclei, the 2 carbon nuclei, if more stuff is holding them together, and that would be the triple bond. So the triple bond is stronger. It takes less energy, this is the weakest, it takes less energy to break apart that single bond because there are fewer negative charges holding these 2 nuclei together. So we can monitor the strength and the length of similar bonds. We have to be comparing similar bonds by looking at whether or not we have singles, doubles, or triples. One last thing, just to sort of wrap up this vocabulary, we have something known as a bond order. A bond order is very simply the number of bonds in a bond. A single bond has a bond order of 1. A double bond has a bond order of 2. and a triple bond has a bond order of 3. This is just some vocabulary, and I'll be using that vocabulary as we go on and look at more and more examples.